the way to the end, Rodney.
All the way?
All the way to the end.
Keep going?
No.
All right. I need a mic. Hello? All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the afternoon. My name is Randy Dunauer. I'm one of your SUMA board members from the city of Saskatoon, and welcome to Plug Into Project Governance. I realize that we're pushing up against the lunch hour, and so if you have not finished your lunch yet, that's fine. Just sit down and sit tight. Go ahead and finish your lunch, and then if this is your session, continue on and join us. If you're registered for another session, you haven't finished your lunch yet, go ahead and finish your lunch, take your time, and move on to your session once you're done your lunch. And so I just wanted to do a few announcements before we go ahead and introduce the session. A note before we start that this session is being audio recorded. So there will be a Q&A period, and this means that we do want you to ask questions into the microphone. So we have microphones set up in the crowd. When you speak, please clearly identify yourself and your municipality and speak clearly right into the microphone so we can all hear you. Speaking into the mic means that everybody in the room can hear you, the panel can hear you, but we're also recording this session, and so it's going to be available on YouTube and the member portal later on, and so then you can access that, and we want all the questions recorded as well as the answers. This is a live session. And as we indicated, it'll be available on the SUMA app later. You can also ask questions not just on the microphone, but you can go to Q&A in the convention app, and you can actually punch live questions in during the panel. And if you punch a question in through the SUMA app, then one of our staff will get up to the microphone and ask that question for you if you like. All right, so now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of them. I'll get you to give them a round of applause when we're done. But if I could get you to give a wave to the crowd when I introduce you. So our panelists are Fern Hebig, the city clerk from Meadow Lake. We have Rodney Audette, the town manager from the town of White City. There's Rodney down at the end. Stefan LaPlante, the principal of Collier's Project Leaders. Welcome, Stefan. Jody Karen, the principal with Collier's Project Leaders. And today's session is going to be moderated by Mike Szynski, the Saskatchewan Vice President for Collier's Project Leaders. Let's give our panel a hand, please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. So for those of you with the SUMA Convention app, you can read more about our presenters there. And when you read their bios, you can see all the work that these folks have put into gaining knowledge that they are going to share with you today. When we plan events for our members, we try to tailor the topics and the speakers to your needs. So please give the speakers your full attention and be open to how their information can apply to your municipality. Some lessons are going to be easier to apply than others, but I'm sure everyone in the room will be able to use the valuable information when you go back to your offices. So thank you so much for joining us in our panel today. Thank you to everybody that signed up for this session, and we welcome you, and please let's give them one more round of applause. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Mike.
Great, thank you very much. Just a quick mic check to make sure everyone can hear me okay. I hear myself. Great, thank you very much for the introduction, and to SUMA for holding an event, and it's not virtual. This is pretty exciting, but bear with us. You know, I was telling my wife last week that I'm used to talking to the group of 4 at our home for the last couple of years, so this is the first time being in a big room, and I'm just not used to this. It's quite exciting. So thank you everyone for being here. Before we go ahead and get started, I just wanted to offer a quick land acknowledgement and wish to acknowledge that this land on which we gather today is Treaty 4 territory, traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Colliers is committed to working together with Indigenous peoples as we take an important step toward a pathway of collaboration, reconciliation, and change. So we'll do a quick look. I'm just going to start firing my stuff down here. In terms of an agenda, I got so much at my control here, and I'm sitting so comfortably. All right, there we go. There's the agenda. A few things to go through. As we said earlier, we do have an interactive poll. There's no right or wrong questions, just to make it interactive and to generate some discussion. That's happening at section 3 of the agenda. We'll go through, and I think we'd said earlier as well that there's an app that everyone has access to, and that'll be your means for which you are interacting. So a number of things that we want to go through, and I think we're looking to recap by 2:30 at the latest, or I will otherwise be cut off, and we'll be ready for that as well. Introductions. Again, thank you for the introductions. We've already achieved that part quickly. There's our pictures. Anything more anyone wants to add? No? We're good to go. Maybe before we do get started, I'm really excited to see how many people are here to talk about project governance. I've been in the infrastructure development, capital delivery world for over 20 years now, and I'm willing to admit that project governance was something that really hasn't really come to light until the last, I would say, 10 years for me. The first 10 years, project governance was something not really talked about. It was overlooked, it was unknown, or just completely disregarded. So it's pretty exciting that everyone wants to talk about it, or maybe people thought that there was a draw for a prize afterwards. I'm not sure, but it's exciting, it's a good topic, and something that has come up over and over and over again. So it's quite exciting to talk about it, for us anyways. Before we get too started into the discussion, I think it's important to maybe offer a few definitions, just so we're on a common ground of what project management is. Now, I don't have it completely memorized, but from the Project Management Institute is a document or a publication we often refer to for such matters, and it defines governance as the framework, functions, processes that guide activities in a project program and portfolio management, so on and so forth. The common terms often associated with project and governance include administration, authority or controls, and for projects, a focus on delivery. However, the PMI focuses on framework, processes, guidance, and oversight over authoritative language, and emphasizes structure through governance. And in doing so, really empowers and encourages efforts through the natural flow of a project's life cycle. That's a nice definition, but really what does it mean? What is it all about? We have this little slide illustration that will give us a little bit more clarity on it, but really when we look at capital project governance, as I said, is that really that framework used to plan and deliver all commercial and technical aspects of a project. It really involves creating an efficient project organization with clear responsibility and defined roles, developing policies and procedures, implementing systems for collecting project execution, data, and reporting KPIs or key performance indicators. And lastly, deploying mechanisms that identify and mitigate performance risk. And the interesting part when we talk about governance is that the project environment really requires a little bit different governance view than that of a traditional organizational structure. And that's where the two worlds often collide, certainly in our experience, and probably what we'll talk about a little bit more, that project managers are people that are asked to deliver on a project, often don't have what we call legitimate power in a workplace or within an organization. They don't have full control over the resources, be it money, be it people, be it staff, equipment. So that is often where project governance can get a little complicated, speaking as a project manager. Still learning after all these years. That's kind of what it is and a few definitions, but maybe I'll look to the panel and start to get generate some discussion here. Fern, do you have any thoughts on what it is?
Always. I'll throw this down because I'm French and I talk with my hands and it'll end up everywhere. For me, project governance is a set of clear expectations. It's getting everyone on the same page, making sure you have the right people in the right room with the right set of tools to do the job. I always say you don't send an accountant into the operating room with a wooden spoon to do surgery. At least I hope not. Good governance is only going to help you in your project, so your project doesn't die on the table from a lack of governance.
Good, thanks, Fern, for that. Rod, anything else to add?
I think when you start talking about project governance, you can break it down into 3 points, and you can have organization structure. The organization has to be fully supportive of a project. People, you have to have management that understands current activities, the project as a whole. And then you have to have an information sharing and with a clear and consistent message to the organization with regards to what the project is and how it is supposed to function.
Good.
Rodney, I think I'd add to that to say that collaboration is a key comment or a key concept behind all these terms or these situations that we run into, because most often I find that these projects revolve around a real need in the communities, right? And those needs, they instill passion. People are really excited about having them occur and successfully complete. And so from that perspective, you may not always agree with what's happening. You may not always agree with the concept or where things are at in that time. And so there is a lot of collaboration that's required to reconcile ideologies or concepts or wants and likes in order for people to really look at the project first. And good governance helps that happen, I think.
Yeah, and I would add that for me, project governance is it's trust, if I could just distill it down to one word, because you start off your project and everyone's coming in with different perspectives, whether they be the organization's perspective or the project's perspective, but it's building that trust with everyone by introducing roles, responsibilities, common objectives, all those things that have the team aligned with what's the purpose of the project, how are we going to achieve success, right?
Good, thanks. It sounds like we all agreed and we all had the same things, and this is not going to be fun for everyone here. I want there to be debate and Stefan disagree with someone. That would be lots of fun. Good. Well, I think looking at what project governance is, it's fairly easy to have a good set of common definitions. Let's go ahead and get a little bit deeper here. We have a theme. A theme is emerging here: the good, the bad, and the absent. And I would have been offended if we said the good and bad and ugly, so we're just saying the good, bad, and absent is the direction we're going to go. And it's really the theme for the rest of our presentation and our panel discussion. The good being proper structure, as we heard, responsibilities, process, and clarity, clear decision-making, authority, and robust planning. Some examples of that would be obviously when projects go well, when they meet objectives, be it schedule, budget, and most importantly, when owners' definition of success is satisfied. That is, in our world, what a successful project is. The bad is chaos, uncertainty, redundancy, and many, many, many more other things out there. An example would be when wrong people are making decisions, when they're not working within their roles, and improper decisions are being made. And the absent is where there's just nothing in place. The cowboys leading with handshakes, expecting everyone to do their part, to follow suit, working on loyalty, honor, and doing it because they're capable. They're going to get it done and everything's going to be fine. And that probably embodies my first 5 years of my career. I'll say it. That's a long time ago. I can say that. But yeah, that's kind of the theme: the good, the bad, and the absent. So this is where we're going to get in, and everyone should have access to the poll now through the app. And we will not jump to a panel discussion just yet on these questions. We kind of want to see where the answers come in. So we don't want to influence things too much, but whenever answers start coming in, we're good to put the poll up to our folks here. Everyone should be able, hopefully, to see it. Is it working on the app? Oh, it's working on the app. Good. And there's no, as I said, right and wrong answers. We're not going to divide the room up between right and wrong and talk to people about it. It's just to get some good discussion going on here. Will we be able to see the... yeah, it's coming, it's coming. Anyone want to sing a song, or this would be the time to entertain the group? I guess just to summarize, good governance, it's unnecessary, it's overly complex, and just best left out. That's item A. Now, I'm going to suggest A is not a good answer. B is only required for major projects which are complex, costly, and visible. C involves clear communication, responsibilities, risk, and structure. D can't be done without the help of experts. E is the only way to ensure your project is successful. So we're starting to see A, B, C. Involves clear communication, responsibilities, risk, and structure. Yeah, that's good to see. I think that we've talked a lot about that already in the first 10 minutes of the discussion. And then E is probably a derivative of that, talking about how it's the only way to ensure a project is really successful. Great, thank you. With that, maybe we'll just go into a bit of a discussion and building up on that. The good, there's Clint Eastwood. He was the good in the movie. Projects succeed, we say, with clear definition, clear line of sight into project performance, internal accountability for achievement of project goals, clear decision-making authority by group and role. An interesting part I wanted to add on this bullet here on decision-making authority is quite often we would like to, I talked earlier about legitimate authority within organizations. Now in the project environment, we'll often take and define roles and give thresholds of approval, or try to define thresholds of approval for the execution of projects so that change orders and things like this are executed quickly and within certain controls that otherwise don't exist in organizational policy. 5, effective procurement strategies and ownership, and 6, rigorous communication and reporting. I'm going to look to the panel and just again get some thoughts, and I'll probably go to Fern again quick, just because you're right here, just to get some of your thoughts on what you see as good project governance.
Well, I usually like to look at something and figure out what it is I don't want in order to figure out what I do want, and you don't want chaos and you don't want ambiguity. What you're looking for is clarity, and I think a lot of that, as Jody said before with trust, it's tied to a good culture within your team and your organization. If you don't have trust, respect, and honesty in your culture for your people leading your project, it's going to be really difficult to get anywhere. So I think if you can start with those foundations, then you're on the road to good governance.
Rod?
To add to Fern's comments, I think it's important that the avenues of communication are very clear and concise for any project and project governance. You have to have a good communication stream between all team and all team members. You also have to have a defined scope. The project has to be clearly laid out and defined so that each member knows exactly what the project entails. And from that, you'll have a defined schedule of goals that I think is important, that has to be established and maintained throughout a project.
Stefan or Jody, anything to add?
If I can I'll keep building on my intro around the trust piece. I think that good project governance means that you've got a well-oiled machine, and that everyone understands their roles and their responsibilities and how they fit in, and that you're not missing, key milestones or over budget, et cetera. So it's a well-functioning machine, and everyone's working collaboratively together.
The last piece I'd add is that, we use terms like defined or clear or, these very harsh or inflexible terms. I think one of the important things of good governance is actually change. And it doesn't mean that those things need to change, like the scope, the schedule, the budget of a project, but the reporting requirements. Or what if you get a new team member on? What if you get new counselors? What if you get new approvers? Maybe what they need and what they want isn't what you're currently doing, and you have to be open to, or have a mechanism to integrate that change into the way that you're functioning as a group, right? And welcome them in, understand their perspective, goes back to collaboration, and then be able to adjust or change according to what their needs are. So that's certainly something that I've seen in the time that I've worked on projects, and still to this day, with a few people in this room today, right? Just last week, we have good conversations about what we're doing and how it needs to change, and that's good. Those are not things that we need to shy away from.
Yeah, and your good governance model is actually going to identify how you manage those changes throughout the project, right? So it not only manages the change, but it tells you how you're going to manage that change. And everybody agrees to that at the onset of the project, that if person A is replaced by person B, or if this happens, this is how we're going to manage it, right?
So I've heard a lot about, we talked a lot about roles and responsibilities, we talked about clear definition, and then I threw a bit of a curveball talking about how project governance and project organization can be very different in the project environment than it is in the organization itself. I'm interested from Fern and Rod, is that consistent with what you would see in your organizations for projects? That there's an org structure and it's set up to do certain things, but then a project may be very different from that org structure?
Well, I think if you have a similar culture as far as governance on your administration side within the municipal jurisdiction, and it's successful and it's defined, your roles and responsibilities are there, you can bring that over to the project management side, and I think then you'll have a successful project, especially if you're having successes within the municipal organization itself on that structure.
Good. And would it be fair to say then, when if there is any additional detail, usually that governance structure, it's maybe put out in a graphic that kind of shows different representation and reporting. And there's probably a terms of reference then too that really binds it all together and says this is the rules. And again, I think those are all badges or characteristics of good governance, right? Good project governance. And another thing I wanted to talk just briefly about too is kind of a stage gate approval process, because it might be different and there might be steering committees and there might be working groups. Again, those aren't part of an organizational structure all the time, right? Great. Well, we're going to get to another test question here. This one is a good one. Now, we might have a lot of good examples around bad governance that we want to share. But again, if everyone could go to the wrap, there's a few questions here about bad governance where A, it doesn't matter because it's unnecessary. B, it results of a culture, misunderstanding, or oversight. Or C, is only apparent when things don't go to plan. Or D, happens unless you use an expert. So bad project governance. Any examples? Does anyone want to share a current project? Or rumors of ones in other jurisdictions? That might be more exciting. All right, just wait.
We're managing them, so there's no bad project governance.
yes.
So bad.
I think everyone's heard the stories, be it in the province, be it in a city, be it in other countries. You know, there's no shortage of projects where things went completely sideways, things happened that no one expected, and you know, you start to look back to it, and often you can draw a line back to the governance structure was just wildly inadequate or not thought of. And that probably was the case in those projects I referenced in the first 5 years of my career, but we learn from those.
You can have the project governance in place, but if everyone hasn't bought in, like if everyone is not on the same page, you've got people going off like cowboys riding off thinking they're going to save the day, and all it does is, you know, throw a kink in the works.
Yeah, so you might have this nice organizational structure, you might have this nice terms of reference, and then it goes over the shoulder. It's there, it's done, and no one cares about it anymore. Good, well, we have some results up, and it looks like we're seeing a lot on item C, which is bad project governance is only apparent when things don't go to plan. Yeah, interesting. Anyone want to add to that? That's certainly when it will manifest, is when things go sideways. Yeah, you'll see it. Great, well, let's ask a couple of questions then of the group now. Following our good and the bad and the ugly, or good and the bad and the absent, here's the bad. The bad. Now, on the other hand, is the bad governance, not necessarily absent, but rather poorly organized, leading to failure. In our experience, projects fail when a clear project definition or transparency into project phases and deliverables is lacking. Internal accountability for project performance is insufficient. Another interesting one that is often overlooked, contracting strategies are poorly defined or absent. So that would be contracting or procurement. How are we going to purchase the things we need? Decision-making responsibilities and steps are unclear or too centralized. That's when I talked earlier about the stage gate approvals and understanding how decisions are made and when. Or when communication is poorly planned, is vague, or ad hoc. So there's not a real structured, robust communication strategy. That's kind of been our experience, what we've seen. And but I'm interested to know again, Fern, I'm picking on you just because this is what happens. You're in the hot seat. You're too close.
I'm too close to you.
Yeah, you're too close. So that's what happens. But yeah, any challenges? Anything agree with this? Anything new that you've seen or heard of?
Anything new. There's always something new. This is never boring. I think a lot of times if your project has failed and it's due to bad governance, you have to look at, it's rarely ever just one person who dropped the ball. You succeed as a team, you fail as a team. Was there poor communication? Did you outline who was supposed to be telling what to who? Was the scope unclear? Were people empowered to do the job? Who was supposed to write the tender? Who was supposed to put out the tender? Who was supposed to check and make sure that answer questions? Like if you don't have all of that outlined, things can very quickly snowball, and pretty soon your project is delayed. It's not getting done on time. It's over budget. The contractors are mad. And the public is mad because no one's engaging with them. They don't understand what's going on. It can be a real disaster if your governance goes sideways.
those are projects you heard of in other jurisdictions. Yeah,
Absolutely,
that's
just
right.
only things I've heard of third hand.
That's right. Rod, anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think, of course, on the bad, you've got the con versus the good. So you have a lack of transparency. You have maybe a poor decision-making process in place. You might have the lack of risk management and risk mitigation measures that should have been incorporated into your project governance model. So those will tend to, if the lack thereof, will tend to provide for a project to potentially get to a failure point.
Jody?
Me again. So for me, bad governance is not enough planning. So it's the measure twice, cut once rule for me. And there's a lot of documentation that we do at the onset of a project, primarily your project charter, your project plan, your schedule. And if these documents aren't agreed to, and if enough time isn't spent on them to really understand what the client expectations are and what the project success measures are, and if they're just rushed through the process, that's where you're going to see the bad governance, because you don't have the right amount of detail in order to go to the next step. We all know that designing and building is the fun stuff, but we have to make sure that we're spending enough time on the planning and that everybody understands, is in on the same page as the whole team, that you're moving forward collectively.
So what I'd add to that is that this is all work, right? It is all, you've got design teams that are designing, construction teams that are building, you've got engineers, you've got financial people, you've got your own organizations, and they're all drifting in different directions, or they all have other work. And so good governance to me is that ability to pull them back in, and that ability to have them focus on the project activities and to be invested in them in order for those things to succeed. So from that perspective, we talk about, what good looks like, what bad looks like, what absent looks like. At the end of the day, it is work. It's real work. It's hard work because we don't all think that it needs to be there. We all have a different perspective on what it looks like. And so it needs that effort to talk to people, to bring them back onto your side, to have them buy in to governance and what it means to them, to you, and to the project.
It's honestly, it's the difference between having a comfortable, difficult conversation and not being able to have that conversation at all because there's so much animosity and disconnect between the team members, right? So having a difficult conversation isn't hard to do if everyone's on the same page and there's documents to reference and processes and procedures and everyone knows their role and you've just sort of gone off the train tracks a bit. Mm-hmm. But it's when that's not defined and you can't even have that conversation because there's no terms of reference, there's no baseline, right?
Yeah, and I just, I want to take that conversation and maybe just go back quickly to the poll question. And I think when I looked at the poll question, the overwhelming response was C, which is bad project governance is only apparent when things don't go to plan. I think that's probably consistent. Like it doesn't, as the saying goes, it doesn't really show its warts until things go really, really bad, and then you start to see it. So in some ways, that investment stuff, and you talked about the amount of work that's required up front, would probably help a lot of these things when things do go sideways. We always tell clients we always plan for 3 moments on a major project. They tend to happen, and you want to be able to go back to that governance document so that this doesn't really take shape on us. But did anyone have anything more to add or object to that question?
No, I think.
I'd like to, oh, sorry.
Ferns, yeah.
Oh,
I had
you
scissors,
won.
man. I go first.
Well, I'll go first now. I think municipalities or organizations should look at project governance as an investment into making a project successful. If you take the time into ensuring that you have a good governance model, you will have the tools to make your project successful, even if something happens to go sideways. You'll have those tools to enhance your ability to change and to mitigate where you need to go. So I think it's it's an investment that needs to be really considered by organizations.
Yeah, I was just going to really add to the whole investment factor. We've been talking a lot in some of our sessions about how investing now will save us money down the road, and it really will. Like if you invest your time, and sometimes it's going to cost you a little money to do it right the first time, then later down the road you're not fixing stuff that's gone wrong because you didn't spend that time now.
I think that might be a really good segue to the next part, which is the absent, because that's some of the reasons why I think it's absent. But what I'm hearing is the investment is well worth it. I think most would agree, and that it's almost the ultimate. It's the airbags of the project, right? Like it's really what it is. And good. Well, let's jump to the third question, and we'll see if there's a trend. Has it been C all along? Item C? I don't want to suggest that's the right answer here. Okay, poll question number 3. Absent project governance is how the projects are usually done, and it's fine. Or it could cause issues, but only for major projects. Results in a lot of wasted time and money spent in the wrong places. Might be why our last project struggled, but we aren't sure. Is the reason why our project is failing or has failed. So, interesting set of, I guess, options in this one. Hey, look at this. C is just rising to the top again. Oh, I shouldn't influence it. Results in a lot of wasted time. Yeah, well, you know what? Interesting. I think that that's probably similar to what you were talking about. Well, everyone kind of talked about the investment. It does take time, and it's something that requires that little bit of upfront investment. But if I go, well, we'll talk about it in a second. But again, overwhelming C. Good. I'll go to the slide. My note here is I just want to add that perhaps just as bad or even worse than bad governance is the occasion when it's just completely absent. Maybe there's a feeling from the project management team that it's just a small project. We don't need to put in that level of rigor. An example that I wanted to share just briefly is when if in a municipality in a different province decides to lead a development all through verbal contracts without any formal structure, documentation, and communication. And let's assume there's a contractor default, which happens a lot in our world, and they don't finish the job, then all of a sudden, what happens? Or if there's a safety event and it ends up in court, these are the things that happen quite regularly in the project environment. And when that governance and all the decision-making authorities, the process, the communication is not there, it can be a real challenge. So just, I guess, the definitions again from or not the definitions, but the characteristics or our observations around projects fail is when a clear project definition is lacking, transparency into project phases and deliverables is missing, internal accountability for project performance is insufficient, contracting is poorly defined, it isn't in the culture. It isn't in the perception that this is important, that we need to spend time doing it. And sometimes rules are perceived as a hindrance. I don't see how this brings any success, but rather it just costs. So a lot there. And when we think about the absent project governance piece, I think we've all seen it. I'll reference my own experience the first few years. Governance just wasn't thought about. It was just do it. And I think what we might hear a little bit too is when we think about governance and that time invest, there's often not time. It's just, let's go, let's get the project done. It's really important. Spring is in the air. It's time to start building. Let's roll. Who cares about all this other stuff? Fern, does that resonate?
Yeah. I think one of the things, I love Saskatchewan, born and raised here, and we have a very strong, beautiful, do-it-yourself culture. A lot of that is, built on handshakes and someone's word, and it's a really lovely thing. In what other province is someone going to stop on the side of the road and help you? It's a great thing, but a lot of times that culture is completely at odds with project governance. It's counterintuitive. It opens up the municipalities and individuals to a lot of risk and liability. Ask any lawyer down at the trade show how easy it is to defend a handshake agreement in court when something goes wrong. He said, she said chat that happened out on site where somebody instructed a contractor to do something they didn't have the authority to. It can be really just a recipe for disaster, really.
Good, thanks. Yeah. And Rod, anything more to add?
I think you start talking about the absence of project management, in my mind, you start thinking about budget for a project. what the heck's a budget? Who needs a budget? You have a project and you're going to do it. So there's lack of accountability. I also feel that there's financial controls then are lacking. And there's no accountability to who says what gets paid, who's getting paid, and where is it coming from. As well, I think the communication of goals and the communication within the organization is, if it's absent, you have the opportunity for misinformation of a project to whether it's the organization, whether it's the municipality, or whether it's the ratepayers as a whole who might be seeking information on a project. So I think that's a severe pitfall of having communication or transparency absent in the process.
Stefan, how about you go? We're gonna change the order here.
No, by all means. So those are really good points, Rod and Fern. So from that perspective, I think that another interesting aspect is this, you touched on the do-it-yourself. Absolutely. I built my own fence. I finished my own yard, and it was a lot of work, and I'm happy with the results, and there was no governance involved, right? I just did it. And so from that perspective, whether you've got a community with a population of 500 or a city with a population of 5,000, the idea is that somewhere in there is work that needs to be done about governance, and whether that's just because you hired an engineering firm to design, oversee the delivery, and turn it over to you, there's still that component of organizing the who, what, when, where, how. It doesn't disappear. And so from that perspective, that's just that interesting touch of, again, born and raised, and so knowing that when you're so in tune with your community and you're so passionate about getting it done, sometimes you want to be there every day, and you think that that's the way to do it. And by all means, I know everybody in this room, we've all experienced success that way. But the problem is that 1% chance of failure is going to stack up. And eventually, that 100th time that you do it, that's when that failure is going to happen, right? So just that little bit of effort as it relates to organizing the who, what, when, where, how, scope, schedule, budget was an easy start, easy way to do it.
We'll see that in a couple of other slides coming up here about the who, what, when, and who's responsible for things. But when we look at a lot of different projects and under governance, we have federal funding agreements that are doing things, and sometimes that's new. Those are new requirements to projects that people aren't privy to on a day-to-day basis. Now all of a sudden you have a responsibility to submit something to the federal government on a monthly basis, and don't you know it has to look like this, feel like this, be received on this date, or thou shall not get money. And we've seen it sometimes where if those things aren't done in just the right process, everything kind of falls apart. So that's probably the who, what, when, and where, just on that dimension. But Jody, anything more to add?
Yeah, I want to talk a bit about the consequences to not having that governance in place. So Rodney, you talked about not defining the budget or not defining the scope. And in a project where there's governance in place, you have the ability to go back and reference those documents and know what the next step is. If you don't have the governance in place, then what happens if you've got to go back and define that, so you're going to see a delay in your project. And not only are you going back and defining it, but everyone's probably not aligned. And so the delays that you're seeing are just sorting through the communication pieces and getting everyone aligned. So you're in a very unideal situation, right?
Great. Well, good discussion. Now we're gonna run straight to the answers. Well, we'll try. We're gonna go to tips, tricks, and tactics that we're gonna talk briefly about. And hopefully we're still. I don't have a watch with me here. Hopefully everything's still okay from a time perspective. But we'll go through and again, we've talked a little bit about different tips and tricks, I think, along the way. But I think we want to focus a little bit more on them right now. So at least we have a few things to share as a group here today. First one, we talked quite a bit about the importance of structure, and I think really that's what it all comes down to. I think governance is having that structure. And when we look inside of a project, again, as I said earlier, in the project environment is very different than it is in the organizational environment at times. And so having within that project governance framework, when you're looking at delivering any kind of a project, having a very clear objective about what the project is, what it sets to achieve, and then related is the success criteria. How do we know we got it right? And that takes a lot of work, and it's not just budget and schedule. It's a lot of things in there that we're trying to unpack and understand, because there's different success criteria and requirements. The defining of roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, That's a big part of the puzzles we talked about earlier today. Process for making decisions and approvals. One thing that I talked earlier, and I think we talked again a little bit more, was if we're delivering a project and we have change orders. Now, if we have a $500 change order come to a project, if it's not clearly said in some policy otherwise, does that have to go to council, for example, for approval, or is it anything over 1,000? Sometimes those things aren't clear, and that's really what we're trying to achieve within the terms of reference in the project domain. And then again, to bound it all together is the process and procedures for communication. So that's a little bit on structure, the importance of structure, but if any folks have anything more to add on this one. Fern's always got something to say.
Sure, I've always got something to say.
Oh, okay. Here's the
I
chance.
think about structure, I think about balls getting dropped. I don't know if anybody remembers the game when you're a kid with all the sticks that go through it and the marbles, and you're pulling out sticks and marbles are falling. And if you don't have a structure to keep the balls from getting dropped, they are going to get dropped and stuff will slip through the cracks. If you don't have structure, maybe you don't have a communications plan, people get left out of the loop. They are feeling uninformed, or they're getting misunderstandings between staff and contractors and council, and there's discontent, and nobody likes to feel left out of the loop. And if you don't have even that one little piece of structure defined, it's really difficult to make a project come in on time, on budget, with everybody happy if you haven't done that.
Yeah, thanks. Anything else, Rob? Ariane?
Me?
No.
I think it's important that to add to that, to make sure that you have a clear scope in terms of reference at the very start. You need to have that strictly defined so that you know where you're moving from point A to the next point. I think you have to have detailed project structure schedules for successful governance frameworks. And you have to have good measurables within that schedule. And you have to be able to look at that, if you're doing a large scale project, it's not once a week, it's not once every 2 weeks. You have to be looking at it daily to ensure that your measurables are being reached. If they are, great. If they aren't, why not? And how do we mitigate those measurables not being reached?
Good. Anything more? I'm good to go.
Well, one thing to add, Mike, which is it's a journey, right? It's easy to say that this is how it should be: scope, schedule, budget, roles, responsibilities. But it really is a journey, and every community, every project is different. And so shaping those things into certainty, which is really the equivalency of success, takes time, but it takes, what you're doing is you're trying to guide how people act, and that's very difficult. And so as councils, as administrations, as consultants, that's the tough part, is trying to define how do people act and trying to guide that. That's why it's hard.
Yeah, I would summarize it as plan, document, communicate, and monitor, right?
And communicate some more.
Yeah, and then communicate again and again. Yeah.
Well, and so that's the structure. Now, the interesting thing is we talked about this, and what we heard earlier is that when it's absent, it's often because it's believed that this is a huge amount of effort. It's going to take forever and ever to do. But the reality is it's not that difficult to get it set up right and to start off that way. And it can be iterative. It can happen as the project evolves a little bit. A big piece of the structure that we talked about earlier is setting objectives. And as a project management firm, this is a part that really is interesting to us, because often we're coming to organizations not knowing what the real objectives are. And when I'm talking about objectives, it's not just on time, on budget. Those are known. Everyone understands that. It's about what is the business need being satisfied? What are the implied needs that we're trying to achieve? And when we ask those questions inside of organizations, it really makes people think, and it can generate some really good discussion. And often we do that through brainstorming sessions, where it's facilitated sessions. Sometimes we call them a visioning or chartering session, where we just go through and say, no, how do we know it's right? What is that moment where we know it's right? And it's so important to spend that time up front to understand clearly across what can be a diverse set of stakeholders to really nail that down. And the other part of objectives that's often overlooked too is what is the alignment to, if there's a real estate strategy or a strategic plan, how is it related? Now, these might seem like simple little steps, but it's quite interesting how often they're overlooked. We've been involved in lots of projects across Canada and into the Middle East where you start doing it, well, wait a second, I saw the strategic plan over here, and this project has nothing to do with that. And it's a good check back in to make sure everything is on the same page. And then lastly, as a project manager, we can't help but overlook, as I said, the triple constraint, which is really scope, time, quality are always really important. Quality really needs to be expanded into those objectives. But anything further to add? Fern, I'll just go right to you again.
Yep.
You haven't moved yet, so.
Yeah, I haven't moved yet. I haven't run over there. I think the objectives are, well, like, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And if you've got some kind of long-term plan, if you've got an OCP or an asset management plan, then you can tell your community, your council, your staff, your funders, we're paving this street here because we outlined a level of service in our asset management plan that says this is what we are giving our community. And this is allowing us to do that. Maybe you're building a new daycare facility because your official community plan says you want to attract more families to your community. If you can take your decisions, like your objectives, and tie them back to your long-term planning documents, that really answers a lot of questions for people. And they should be the foundation of your decision-making. You should be tying your decisions back to what those plans are.
Good. Rod?
I guess in a way, it's vetting the project against your internal documentation, your OCP, your zoning bylaw, your strategic plan. You're vetting your project to ensure that it meets the needs and the goals and the objectives of your community. So it's very important to have that process in place and to ensure that those things are reviewed or vetted on timely fashion.
Jody?
I have nothing to add. I think I agree with both Fern and Rod. That was great.
This is worthy of note right now. She's speechless. Stefan, over to you.
Sure, and so I appreciate Fern touching on the OCP and your master plans and your strategic plans. Those are very important documents that can allow you to align your capital projects with your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And at least that part should be clear from that perspective. If there's some work that has to happen after that, that's okay. That work can be done. But understanding the why of your project is going to help inform the rest of the project, because the why can be very different depending on, again, the communities, what your interests are as a community, and so it really helps point the needle in the right direction. The second piece, or the last piece for me in any case, is that quite often there's a lot of pressure in thinking that we need to have all the answers as soon as they're asked, especially when it relates to ratepayers or members of the communities that are like, why are we doing this? What's happening? Where are we at? And the point is that as municipal representatives, we don't always have to have the answer, but we need to have a mechanism that can produce those results, or that can help communicate that information, or at the very least, help communicate why this is happening in the first place. Why are we building, why are we paving this length of the street? And when people know that, then at least they're a lot more understandable of what is happening and why it's happening.
Good. Thanks, Stefan. Just stopping on measuring success, and I think this is a real important piece. It relates obviously to objectives. The point I wanted to make here, and I won't read them all here, I think we're probably getting close to time, but in terms of measuring success, it's not just when the project's done, and I think that's what a common mistake we see is people are really focusing on what are the success criteria when it's done, when we think it's very important to measure success at strategic intervals or phases throughout the project, so as it's evolving that it's heading the right path, and we find that to be a very important but often overlooked step, and again, having those success criteria defined and well known early up in the stage, in the initial stages of the project. And Fern, I don't know if you had any stories or any observations on that, or if you agree or disagree. Hopefully you disagree, so we have a heated debate.
Disagree? You're wrong.
Oh.
No, I'll give the example of if you've got an office building and you're changing all the lighting from fluorescent to LEDs because you've got staff getting headaches and taking sick days. Maybe one of your measurement metrics isn't just, yay, we installed lighting. Like, okay, job well done. Maybe it's going to expand over the next year. You're going to continue measuring, and maybe staff are now taking less sick days. And maybe that was one of your objectives, and maybe you're not going to succeed in every objective, but at least if you've got something to measure, then you've got the opportunity for some lessons learned, and how did this go right? How did it go wrong? Those are always important discussions to have at the end when you're measuring if your project was successful.
Lessons learned, another item often overlooked. That's good. Rod, or let's see, who else do I want to go? Yeah, go ahead, Rod.
Well, she stole my lessons learned phrase, but I think it's important when you're measuring success to ensure that you review the relationship of your project to the scope of the entire municipality, or with regards to whether it's recreation, whether it's water and sewer, whether it's public works. Review, current and past projects to see what was done, what could be done better. And then you have a relationship that you can build between even departments on that end to see how they functioned within capital project management themselves. Because sometimes in the larger organizations you get, your project management comes in departments. It's not just the town as a whole doing something. It could be the city public works doing something over here, and it could be parks and rec and maintenance doing something over there. And if they can review their successes and measure them against each other, even more efficiencies and benefits can be found.
Good. Jody?
Yeah. So I think as a municipality, the importance of measuring success is, I think that's key, because the number of stakeholders that a municipality has, the number of eyes that are on a project are different than the number of eyes that are on a private project. And so the importance of measuring success allows you to have that open, transparent communication to the municipality and be able to be in a position where you can say, this is what our success measure was, this is what we achieved, and you can openly communicate that to everyone. And so there's no gray area in terms of what the objective was, what were we supposed to do, right? Why did we change the lights out, right?
Mm-hmm. Stefan, anything further to add? Or is this your chance to be speechless?
I'm speechless.
Oh my goodness. Good. Well, let's go on to the next item here that we really wanted to talk about is, we've been talking about roles and responsibilities. And I think within the project domain, again, as we've been talking about it, is almost taking an organizational chart approach by having steering committees and having terms of reference for working groups and other specialty groups. And as you have these people identified and they're grouped, it might look something like this, but obviously it'll be dependent on the type of project. Often the best way we've seen is to try to put what we call a RACI chart, which we're going to get all geeky PM lingo here, but RACI chart is identifying who is responsible, accountable, and who's to be consulted with or informed with regards to any deliverable or any discussion point. And sounds like a big thing, but it's really not. And again, these easy steps are so important, just to have clarity on who needs what, when, how, why, relates to Stefan's comments earlier. So really important part of project governance, I would say, and really is a foundation to our project governance documents as we generate them. Unless, Fern, you completely disagree. Is this the one?
No.
Oh, geez.
No such luck.
Anything to add?
Well, always. It's the who question is always the most important part to answer, I think, but also why. Why is that the person that we want to do the thing? Is it their education, the skills, the abilities, or are they just convenient? Are they the guy who can be in town that day? Like, why are they doing that job or giving them to do? Making sure that you've got clear expectations of that person in that role. You get confused staff, confused contractors. No one knows who they're supposed to report to and when. That can kind of cause a lot of cost, time, delays in your project. And I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that everyone is clear on their role and what their deadlines are. If you've got a government grant and they require you to do a piece of public engagement that has to be done by this date, you get to the end of your project and realize you didn't do this piece of public engagement that the government required you to do. There's going to be an awful lot of pushback from the government. They could withhold your funding. It's really important to make sure that you've outlined very clearly who's doing what and why.
Good. Rod, anything further?
Well, I think it just goes back to the initial conversations we had on the good, the bad, and the absent, having a solid framework, defined roles and responsibilities. Clear and transparent communication so that everyone is aware of what the expectations are of the organization, of the designers, the project manager, the team, the contractor. If you have that all laid out and it's specific and it's detailed, your risks are muchly mitigated and you set yourself up for much greater success.
Good, well said. Maybe I'll just keep on moving on here if you guys are okay, unless there's anything more to add. Good. Another item that we wanted to talk briefly about here is the importance of making decisions. Now again, this is almost kind of a summary. I've talked quite a bit about it already, is within the project governance documents, having, often we'll refer to it as a decision-making matrix or authority, where there's just real clarity on who can make what decisions, and again, it often varies from what we'll call the legitimate power that resides in the organizational structure or other policies. And that's something we see, and it's only exponentially bigger when you start taking a project that was set up to do something, but it has 3 or 4 different organizations that are all involved in the project. That's when it becomes really, really important. And we want to make sure we spend a lot of time doing that. And again, looking back to that concept of legitimate power. But if there's anything further to add or contradict, no. I still think it's going to happen for one day.
Contradiction, Mike. It does tie directly back to your roles and responsibilities. I mean, you would think something as simple as invoicing is going to be quick and easy, but who's the contractor supposed to send the invoice to? Are they sending it by email? Are they mailing it? Do they get paid by EFT? Who's going to verify that what's on that invoice was actually done and that they're charging us the agreed price? Who's going to, authorize that before it goes to payroll? Is that within your organizational structure, or is there something specific within this project where it's going to have to go through a couple levels of approvals? I always caution, levels of our approvals are great, but then if you have too many for even the smallest decisions, you get bogged down in a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, and people start getting really frustrated with a project that doesn't seem to be moving anywhere. Mm-hmm. So it's an important piece to have clearly laid out, and I think if it's clearly defined, you can move a lot more quickly through the process.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought up one item on payment of invoices. Now, a lot of folks might have heard that there was recent amendments to our builder's lien legislation now, where we have prompt payment legislation in Saskatchewan. So, everyone in here, anyone that's involved in paying contractors, there is a duty to pay within a certain period of time. I'm not going to offer any type of in-depth legal opinion on the technicalities of that legislation, but it's different than what we're accustomed to. And there's different terms, and there's different policies that need to be put in place so that we can react to them in a timely manner. Otherwise, there's mandatory adjudication clauses that could be triggered, and that's just a whole world of excitement, I'm sure. Rod, anything more to add on decision making?
On decision making, no, I'm good there.
A pass. Good. Okay, well, I'll keep on going through. We're almost at the end for questions, so if people have questions, let's start thinking about them, and we'll get there in a moment. Communicating has been, again, kind of a foundation throughout the discussion today, and the importance of it. I talked a little bit about a RACI chart because I'm a PM at heart, and I can't help but talk about RACIs or project charters somewhere along the way or multiple times throughout. This is as simple as it is. Like, this is a foundation of a project governance document. That's not a lot of, sorry, I keep on thinking of the slides there somewhere, but yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's a table, just understanding. We talked a little bit about invoices. That's the what. Well, when? What's the duration? Is it monthly? Who gets it? When? Just spending a little bit of time to have clarity on that inside the project domain is just so important. And I don't know if Fern, I'll go to you again because again you're still sitting there. But does this resonate? Do you see value in this? Do you guys use this?
Absolutely. I err on the side of over communicating, which anyone who knows me knows I communicate a lot. But I will over communicate a thing just so that I'm making sure that I'm not forgetting to communicate it entirely. And that's not just externally, but internally, making sure your team is all aware of what's going on. How are your stakeholders and others supposed to know the status of a project? How can you report that back to council, to your community? You can put somebody in charge of communications, but if you don't have it laid out as to who's getting told what when, they won't have anything to tell people because they haven't themselves been informed of where things are. So I think like laying that out is super integral to your process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Agreed. Rod, anything to add to that?
No, just to reiterate the importance of communicating, and if we want to say over communicating, we're in a world where we need to mitigate almost every move that a municipality makes, whether it's whether it's project management or whether it's a decision out of a budget item or whatever. We need to ensure that we provide the public and provide our organization with all the information that's available so that they can understand why a decision was made, how it was made, and where it was leading to. And I think it's very important that that process is clearly defined within an organization and also within a project for project management as well.
Good. Anyone any further to add? Good. I think this is our last slide before we get to a Q&A. And there it is. There's my cheat sheet, or my geek sheet on a RACI chart, and the importance, again, a clear, easy document that just adds, again, a lot of clarity to what we see in the project domain, and it may not otherwise exist. And it's really, again, that responsibility, accountability, consulted and informed. And when we're working on big projects, and it's not just big projects, maybe complex projects or projects where there's multiple organizations involved, well, I'll tell you, this has saved us, and it's given clarity, and it's really put our be it counselors, be it whomever, in a lot of peace, knowing who's doing what and when they're going to get something. So really, really, really important piece of the puzzle, and something we wanted to share. And I don't know if there's any experiences with RACI charts. Fern, anything you want to add on that?
I love a good chart. I don't.
A good chart, yeah.
Charts and graphs. Visual is always incredibly helpful. I think one of the worst things you can do is sit around a table as a group and say, "Yep, someone needs to do that." Adults do that with tasks about as well as kids do it with chores. You can't walk into a room and say, "Someone do the dishes." They're never getting done. I mean, if somebody's in charge of sending out your task lists and your action items, guaranteed this is not the only project people are working on, and they forget to do things. I mean, I forget to do things. Oops, I forgot I was in charge of doing that thing. Well, but do you have a process set up for who's reminding who of what, when? That it really will be proactive way of getting your communications on track and keeping them there. And if they go off the rails, you've got a system for bringing them back in.
Good. Stefan, you like a good RACI chart?
I do. More importantly, I think going back to, or relating the topic to something that we all evolved with, is safety, right? We all think about safety as something maybe 20 years ago really wasn't many forms or any structure associated with it. And then nowadays, it's it's regulated, but it's also very structured, right? There's good governance applied to safety. And so I want us, 10 years from now, to look back and to say a RACI chart is a normal thing. We all know what it is because it's implemented, it's used, and it provides this purpose, or this is the purpose and this is the benefit that it provides. So from that perspective, I really want us to look at forward thinking, how to implement little pieces like the RACI chart and how we work in our daily lives.
Good, thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work. We know that. That's a good PM term, and when we're delivering projects, everyone working together, everyone pulling on the same oar in the same direction is quite important. So now is the time where we wanted to get into Q&A, and I don't know how we're doing for time and how much time is left, but we probably got a few minutes to do that and to have a bit of a discussion. So I think there's 4 microphones spread throughout the room. So if there is any questions of this panel, they'll gladly take them. Yeah, exactly.
So we do have a question on the app, and it is, how can administration manage to lead with good governance with a micromanaging mayor that doesn't follow laws, contracts, general provincial rules, council decisions, etc.?
Gee, I'd like to defer that question.
Where's the award for the best question?
Yeah. So if I could summarize the question, just it's how do we engage or to develop a strong governance structure with a mayor, or let's just say an elected official that sees no value and just wants to keep on rolling. Yeah, is that the right summary? Fern has the answer. No, I think
I have
that,
an answer, sure.
yeah. Well, I think that when any type of a process is trying to be introduced into an organization, you obviously have to instill a want into people as to why is there value in doing it. And I've dealt with senior officials in the past where maybe didn't see value in this exercise or other exercises for that matter. And yeah, I mean, this is a fairly high-level statement, but I think that in the past where we've had luck is trying to find a reason why it's of value to them and why that what it's going to avoid in upfront if we do this work, the increased accountability it's going to bring to the project, the reduced amount of questions that they may get during the execution of the project, other things that may cause them a lot of difficulty down the line. Again, I don't look at project governance as being something that is a problem about putting it to a project. It's more about introducing clarity. I know I'm oversimplifying it, but Fern, go ahead.
Okay. Well, there is no good answer. There is no easy answer. A lot of that comes right back to what we were talking about with good governance is your culture, is your organizational culture. And that is a very difficult thing to change. It can take a long time to change that. Baby steps sometimes are needed. It's also difficult when you're dealing with different personalities. Not everybody responds to things the same way. Sometimes you're really gonna have to focus on what are the benefits. Some people are really focused on the bottom line. So let's highlight the fact that doing this now will save us money later. I mean, maybe that's the direction you need to go. Really a lot of it is an individual approach to that person to help them become a better part of your culture. They help you get to where you need to be.
I think if I could just add, and we'll go down the line here, but I just want to make the point too that when we're talking about project governance doesn't mean invest $100,000 before you do anything in developing the governance. It really is not that at all. I mean, this really doesn't have to come with any cost. And it can be very quickly done and efficiently done. We saw a few tables and a few other documents that are out there, and God knows there's other examples that exist. It's just about introducing clarity to say, we're going to do this project. There's going to be questions from these people. These people are going to be involved in doing things. What is the form of contract that's going to be required? Who's going to sign it? What if there's a change? Are we going to come back to you for anything and everything? Because these things are going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when, and so how are we going to react to them? That's some of the things we've seen in the past. But Jody, anything or anyone else?
I think if there's some resistance there, maybe it's a matter of, again, Fern's, or I think Mike said it's a matter of understanding the why, but you don't need to jump in the pool with both feet. You can always figure out what are your top 3 governance issues? What can we do to push forward with the baby steps? How can we address some of the thorns in the side and get moving, and then you do that on the first project, and as you move forward with other projects, you can add and build on that model. So it's not as though you have to do everything all at once.
Incremental is what you're saying. It's incremental growth, yeah.
I have my thoughts, which is, who's the mayor? The mayor's a resident. And I don't mean like, who's the mayor? I mean like, who is the mayor? The mayor's a resident. And I go back to mentioning that there's a lot of passion involved. Like if you're representing your community, it's because you care about your community. You want to see it improve. You want to see it succeed. And sometimes, yes, that can go a little bit into the overbearing side, but that doesn't have to be the mayor, right? But from that perspective, as members of municipalities, administrations, councils, you truly care about your communities. Therefore, you have a vested interest in making it succeed. And that can translate into some pretty strong behaviors that can be managed through having an agreement or going back to really defining, why are you doing this in the first place? What are you doing? How much is it going to cost? When is it going to be done? And if you can answer those things, typically you can curb some of those behaviors that you see. But again, to go back is to I don't want to like guilt people into not speaking their opinion, right? We can only improve as a team if we talk about some of these issues or talk about some of these questions that are being asked. So that's part of municipal governance, and it bleeds over into project governance, and we're only as good as we behave as a team. But from that perspective that's a very important thing to address, right? What about these very strong personalities? And if you take time to invest in who, what, when, where, how, you can help answer those concerns, because that's what they are, they're concerns. So that person can get their foot off the shovel, they can get down into their desk and do their job. But my experience.
It's a tough question that was asked. And to be honest, there probably isn't any real correct answer. The biggest thing, and Fern alluded to it, was culture. Culture, and I think you have to have an ability to have trust in a project and trust in the people that are running a project. Those two things, I think, are the largest component of having success, and having whether it's an elected official, and not just saying a mayor, an elected official, buy into trusting who is managing a project, whether it's the administrator in some of the smaller municipalities, or whether it's a project manager on larger scale projects in larger municipalities. That word trust, I think, is a huge factor. And to do that, I think what you have to do is, as an administrator or administration, you have to bring the right people in to try to create that atmosphere and that culture. And if that means bringing in somebody that is a consultant to come down and sit in with your council and say, here, we're going to do some governance training, or we're going to do some other training that provides you the tools to be a better elected official, to enhance your ability to make decisions on behalf of the municipality. Maybe that's what needs to be done to try to garner that trust factor that allows a project or project management to occur in a more streamlined manner.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've noticed that elected officials or senior folks are threatened sometimes by the idea of project governance, because it could be felt as though they're going to be pushed aside, or things are going to happen outside of their authority. And certainly that's not the intention. It's about highest and best use of that person's time as well, and getting agreement with it. So yeah, I mean, we could talk about it. No straight answer on that one. But I will say, if there ever was a more perfect anonymously submitted question, that was the one. Good. Anything further? Oh, there's one coming.
We do have a couple more questions through the app. Nothing quite that spicy. One is, will there be a PDF of this session available? Got a PDF?
I don't see why not. Sure.
Okay, so we'll figure that out. And then the second one is there a rule of thumb for when to share and how much information is to be shared with the public in regards to project details?
Oh, that's a perfect governance question. I think those are the questions that you want to ask in consideration of developing the governance, to know what is the communication strategy around what is happening, when is it happening, and when is it appropriate to share. Closely related to that question is, when do you go public with a rendering or a floor plan of said facility, assuming it's a new hospital or school? We're very wary of some clients and elected officials' eagerness to go public and say, here it is, without knowing if they can afford the damn thing. We've seen that a lot, and it's very frightening. So I think that's similar, but that's exactly those questions of why we like to see a strong governance, so we know when things can go out and when they shouldn't. And that really is going to come down to the contributions of the individuals within that steering committee, let's call it, or otherwise. I think we're probably out of time, so sorry, folks.
I want to add one question, because I do feel it answers, or one answer, because I do feel it answers the question, which is, there's no golden rule as there is really golden concepts of transparency, fairness, and probity. And if you follow those, then what Mike touched will help inform what does get shared, but you'll have done it in a fair way, transparently. And if probity is, looking in, was it done right? You'll have answered those things.
All right. Let's give our panel a hand, if we could, please, ladies and gentlemen. Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank Mike, Jody, and Stefan from Colliers, and Fern and Rodney from the municipal sector for doing this today, talking about project governance. It was an incredible panel talking about the importance of taking the time and the work, I got that word, Stefan, the work and the effort up front to have proper governance to bring clarity to really, I don't want to say guarantee the success of your project, but put you further down the road into ensuring that you're going to have a successful result. So thank you very much. It's very evident you know what you're talking about, and this is something that's passionate to you. And thank you for sharing that passion with us today as well. We really appreciate it very much. For those of you in the room, please remember that all of our presentations are on the SUMI YouTube page. and on the portal on SUMA's website. You now have a break that's sponsored by MPE, so during the break I encourage you to connect with our vendors in the trade show. We're going to meet back in the grand ballroom for resolutions and the prize giveaway at 3:30. Let's give him one more hand, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Well done. That was tremendous. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fern.
Oh, very welcome.
That was very enjoyable. Thank you.